Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another session of our Clienteling 101 series. My name is Jeff Ellis, and I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at BSPK. And this week, I'm especially excited because we have a special guest joining us to discuss trends in retail clienteling. And I've been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time. We ask that everyone please keep yourselves on mute. And if you have any questions, just kindly drop them in the chat. And at the end of our conversation, we'll have a short Q&A session and we can answer all of your questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my friend and my former colleague, Jill Grande. Jill is the Northern California manager for Saint Laurent and has previously held positions in senior leadership at both Tiffany and Rolex. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Jeff.
My pleasure. So without further ado, why don't we get started? And to start off the conversation, I'd love to hear about your approach to clienteling and how it's evolved over your career.
Sure. I think, I've had a long career for over 20 years in retail, especially luxury retail. So I think as it's evolved, it's become much more relationship based versus product based. And I think a lot of retailers now are actually figuring that out as well. So I've had the fortunate opportunity to work with some amazing leaders. And the focus really has always been on building the relationship versus product and or brand. Ultimately, that's how you drive loyalty. So I think as my career has progressed, we've seen the importance of that, especially with COVID and times where you're completely shut down. We were just speaking the ability to really build a one-on-one experience with clients. And I also think that we're seeing that in trends is people want to continue a special experience. That's what continues to drive people into the brick and mortar versus the ability to build and shop online. So I think that that's really how we've evolved and seen it's been the most significant and importance. And also from a recruiting aspect, you're looking for people that know how to build relationships, which I think is its own skill.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I know we've had a lot of conversations about clienteling and, I think there's definitely some markets where, you know, it, business is just exploding in retail, but then there's other markets where, traffic is down and it's really challenging. And I agree with you. I think it's really those relationships that, that keep people coming back, keep people engaged. And I think especially during COVID too, that really made me realize the how much I valued that authenticity and those relationships that I have in the places that I shop.
Absolutely.
Well, that's a perfect segue into my next question, which is what strategies do you use to build and maintain strong relationships with your clients?
Um, I would say that the strategy or secret is I would say it's the ability to connect past, again, it's past product. We see it a lot, people, when you're in retail stores or I guess restaurants, car dealerships, when you're in any type of luxury experience, a lot of people focus on what's here, what's now, what has brought you in today. I think my most successful relationships with clients and my longest lasting have been built completely around the idea of a friendship, the ability to connect much past product and focus more on experience and actually getting to know people. I had said in a podcast actually with Ron, curiosity is the key to success. And when you're curious about people and ask more questions about who they are as a person and their lifestyle and their family, it builds a lasting connection. Typically, people will follow you from brand to brand or job to job, or that's how you also create connections. So it goes back to I think strong relationships with clients, but also networking in general within your career path, building relationships much past what you're currently doing in that moment is what keeps people coming back to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. And, I mean, I remember when we used to work together in retail, you used to be so purposeful in the appointments that you would plan in your stores. And I think it was you that told me that, when you had appointments, you would, change the color of your, like have your team change the color of like the scarves they were wearing to match the stone that you were showing. And, uh,
Yeah.
and I think that purposefulness, I think that clients appreciate that. They remember that. So I think that's that's wonderful, and that's so important. So how do you identify high value clients? I mean, you have so many people that come through your doors every day. How do you decide who to clientele to? How do you decide, what's the who are the people that you should target for different events or different campaigns?
I think it's a great question. So, I mean, again, we work in luxury, and I think even across any type of industry, you have several clients that are willing to spend money or are curious to spend money. The ability to recognize high value clients is to know your market, number one, know the client, the type of client that's walking through your doors or looking at your product. Um, and getting to know the opportunity that's in front of you. I think oftentimes people in sales, and I think across, again, all industries, you typically hesitate and say, like, this is the product I want to sell, and you move quickly through those product opportunities. And if you get a client to say, okay, I'll make this purchase, then you move on, let's close the purchase. I think the ability to identify high value clients, again, it goes back to curiosity and not really trying to sell a client in the first interaction, and recognizing that, clients in certain communities, and I think now is a great example, right? Traffic is down in stores across retail. People can shop online, but traffic is even down online. Luxury is just not moving the way it was 3 years ago. So the opportunity is when you sit down with a client and you meet a new client, is really finding out what their lifestyle is like, where their push buttons are, what makes them curious about different things. Once you have the ability to say, like, I'm going to get involved, especially as leaders, I think as leaders you have to get involved with your sales reps that are on your sales floors every single day. Ultimately, if you're involved at that level and being curious and sitting down and also doing some research, I mean, Google's a great partner to have immediately, especially if you're in Silicon Valley. You should be Googling all of your clients. It just helps you connect more. It helps you understand more. It helps you figure out a different approach because every client has a different way of communicating, and I think a different cadence of communication. So some people, I mean, I know that we still do emails, but I don't think that I couldn't remember the last time I've received a personal email from a friend. So I think that if you start looking at the different ways to connect with people, you figure out the value of that client for you. And it may not always work. I mean, you can have a high net worth individual that really doesn't end up being a VIP client in your business, but it could be a person that is in the next business. So it's just understanding who that person is within society and within your brand, and the ability to grow that is just you continuing to push the limits.
Definitely, yeah, and I agree with you. I don't think you can really take a cookie cutter approach to every single situation. Every client is different, and I agree. I think asking the right discovery questions to really get to know them and understand what they like, what they don't like, what their lifestyle is like, what their family life is like, what their career is like. That's going to be
Yeah.
so important to getting to know them and building that relationship.
Well, I think, I mean, it really does go back to utilizing some type of CRM platform, right? Or taking notes. I know that now taking notes in a notebook would feel odd to most of us. However, it's taking notes with interactions, even if it's a first interaction, understanding. When I go into stores and sit down with our client advisors, and I ask, tell me about your client, I'll get amazing answers, or some I'll just say, what do they do? And they have no idea. So I think that it's sitting down and looking at people that are very invested in their client opportunities, taking notes about their children's name, their jobs, their new job, their new home, what's really working and happening in people's lives. And that is the way to connect with people, and also start to connect the dots for yourself. So I think that that's a huge aspect of it.
Definitely, yeah, and I think that leadership involvement that you mentioned, that's so important too, because I know when we worked together, I mean, you probably could have rattled off the top 50 clients for your store because
Yeah.
you were involved in every single VIC appointment, and I think that leadership aspect is so important too, and you touched on that because you have to show your people the right way. You have to model that great behavior, and I think when you do that, that's when you get excellence from your team.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a perfect segue into my next question, which is how do you train and motivate your sales team to engage in effective clienteling practices?
I think you have to show people. And I think you also, when you get excited about their opportunities, it makes people more excited. And it also could show that, something that maybe they don't see and they say, hey, I have this, opportunity for a client, especially, at Tiffany's or in fashion, you have an opportunity for a client that, is looking to spend a good amount of money. Oftentimes, I think you have leaders that can say, okay, great, let me know how it goes. Let me know if you need anything. I think my approach is always like, what's our next step? What's our next text message? Let's draft something. Let's edit it. Let's think about different approaches. I think when you have a bigger opportunity, the bigger the opportunity client, the more nervous typically a sales rep will be. So that is really where leadership comes in, and being and sitting down with them and drafting a plan and a strategy. I mean, you would never, I think in other industries, let's say you're selling technology, you wouldn't go to a client meeting without any preparation. Normally you have PowerPoints and you have objectives and things that you want to show and sales pitches. And I think oftentimes people just leave it to whatever's happening on your sales floor, and there's just no practice. I do it, with friends, with personal friends outside of our industry. Like, let's practice that. It's just like interviewing. Hopefully you don't show up to an interview without research the product, the brand, the person you're interviewing with. So it's the same thing. And I think keeping that level of passion with the team. Also, I think it's important to tell the team what you've done as well, so that they understand like you are somebody of influence and somebody that they really want to work with. Showing people that they can do stuff, especially again, if I go back to this economy and retail right now, getting people excited. I've had past employees reach out to me with, in different brands saying business is down 80%. That's tough, right? So we're seeing that, salespeople are losing money and things, and it goes back to, and traffic's down. Well, digging into traffic may be down in your store, but you have 6,000 people in your client book. You still have 6,000 people. So I think sitting down and giving people new, fresh ways of looking at things. And oftentimes too, it's stepping back as leaders and saying, okay, I need to remove myself from this particular moment or sales floor and say, okay, what can we do? Oftentimes, I mean, I've done it recently. We're looking in client books of things and we see, a 5% outreach for the year. People get demotivated, and it's not because they don't want to, but you do lose enthusiasm, you lose spirit. So sometimes it's as simple as taking someone outside of their element, sitting down with them and say, okay, let's look at this together with fresh eyes. What else can we do? And really celebrating the wins is important. Oftentimes, we focus on a low performer or low performance, and our people that are still winning and still have a lot of enthusiasm. We're like, hey, great, thanks, but I got to go this way. It's stopping and pausing and really celebrating that person that's continuing to win and continuing to try, and figuring out how can you make that person, to me, figuring out how can you make that person more influential within your brand, within your region, within your market. I think that those are some of the bigger opportunities, because everyone loves to see other people winning and they want to win as themselves. And if they can share that secret sauce, then you have the ability to influence a greater market.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, and I think too, when business is down like that, business is down 80%, that can be really demotivating. And if that's
Mm-hmm.
all that you focus on, people aren't going to be excited when they come to work. They're not going to be at their best. So when you can take that situation and say, yeah, business is challenging. It's tough right now, but it's not always going to be that way. And let's focus on the things that are going well. Let's focus on the great things that happen every day. And and I think there are wins every single day that are worth celebrating. It's so important to be positive, and there's such power in positivity when you can make someone feel good about themselves. And I absolutely agree with your comments about preparation. I mean, um, you know, the analogy to a job interview, right? You would never show up to a job interview without preparing. And what's the quote? Failing to prepare is preparing to fail. Uh,
Yeah.
when you do your research, when you prep and you're purposeful about something, I think you get a much better result. And I can speak from my experience when I was a manager in retail. I didn't have all the answers, but I think usually when we would step away and we'd come off the floor and we'd have a conversation and we'd look at client books together. Usually when we talk things out, we could figure out a great plan of attack. right? Because they know the clients, I know the business. So together, it was a perfect combination to really figure out what our path would look like going forward.
Absolutely.
Well, so that's a great segue into the next question, which is how do you measure the success of clienteling programs? And I'd be curious to know how, both from a qualitative and a quantitative standpoint.
Well, I think I guess number one is, if you go back to CRM, right, you want to capture your wins or your opportunities and such, right? So you have to encourage the use of technology today, I think. In a past company, actually, Ron and I worked, we went from binders, I think we all did. We went from using binders and paper to technology. And that was in itself, we were yanking binders out of people's arms and they were being hidden
I
and
remember
such.
those days.
Yeah, people didn't want change, right? So I think you have to, number one, encourage technology, because technology for us as leaders, we use it for reporting. We use it to understand and engage with clients, yes, but we use it to understand our habits and behaviors. That's really what a CRM system is. So I think that that's critical in any particular business. But I think the qualitative, again, is the small wins in the relationship. I don't know that, like, it's great if you sell a product, but there's nothing better when you have a lifelong client and client relationship, and they call you or they stop by to see you and say, hey, I'm going to go look for a completely different product than you sell, can you go with me? Or they celebrate their life's milestones with you that has nothing to do with you ultimately, right? So I think you definitely see that in jewelry. You definitely saw amazing relationships being built, and ultimately too, because I think people had spent more money in jewelry, it was a more intimate experience.
Mhm.
I think what we're seeing today is when we look at like measuring success in clienteling programs, it's does it make sense to our client teams, right? So if we're saying to our teams like, hey, let's execute this, we need you to contact this many clients. I think if people don't know the why behind it, why am I doing this? Or who is this client segment? Or why are these clients being pushed to me? I think it's owed to our sales teams to say, this is why we think you should focus on this particular client group. I think typically people focus on their top 10, top 20, top 50 clients. But when you're looking at a book of 6,000 clients, it's really helpful for any type of client development team to say, I want to focus on this client segment, and here's why, and showing longevity in that. Yes, we want to close sales today, convert today, drive traffic today. But I think that there's some brands that are doing phenomenal today, right? And their business is on fire, can't be touched. They don't have the product because the demand is so high. Great. But in a year, 5 years, you could be setting yourself up for failure if you don't plan to have some type of outreach behavior. So I think we're all starting to see that. Some of the, most in-demand brands are seeing a slow in traffic. And you also start to see people movement. If people don't feel developed, or they're learning while they're selling or while they're producing for you, you're going to lose your talent. And we see a lot of talent right now jumping around. I know, it's been conversations of recruiting is very hard. You're relying on LinkedIn or Indeed, which oftentimes the talent doesn't make any sense that you're meeting. And you're relying on your leaders to ultimately capture and keep and bring in amazing new talent. So I think when we look at clienteling programs, it's really to support our sales teams making the money that we all promised them that they would make. It also helps develop relationships for the company. So it's a win-win, but ultimately it has to be driven by the leaders in the company. They have to believe in that CRM system. They have to believe in those client development managers and their store leaders, ultimately for it to win on both sides. Because you ultimately, I think when you don't do that, you could lose your talent and you lose the client. And then you're back at square one trying to rebuild, especially in an economy today. So that's a tough place. I think it has to be like the most important aspect in measuring success.
Sure. Well, and I think everything that you shared, it really all comes back to leadership presence. And
Yeah.
I know you're somebody who's always on the sales floor, who's always involved. And I think when people experience that leadership presence, when they have somebody showing them the right way and modeling great behaviors, they feel supported, right? So you don't have to worry as much about retention because you know the temperature of your brand. And I think, or of your store. And I think it's really easy to measure the qualitative success. Somebody can measure that from, you know, an office thousands of miles away, but the qualitative success is something that I think you really have to be on the sales floor to experience and to know.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
and like you mentioned, I think sometimes some of the things that we do with clienteling may take a little bit of time to produce results, but when we plant those seeds, when we take the time to really be purposeful in our actions, I think those results that we do reap are going to be, far greater than just focusing on walk-in traffic. And
Oh,
I think a
absolutely.
lot of the brands too that have really experienced amazing success over the last several years and are now sort of beginning to struggle. Um, they've really been focusing more on the marketing side than the clienteling side and building those one-to-one relationships. And I don't know if you'd agree, but I think, sometimes in my career, I think the best salespeople have come from not necessarily the top brands. They've come from multi-brand stores or small boutiques because, those are the brands that you really have to, or the companies where you really have to hustle to make it happen. And
Absolutely.
I found, sometimes those people are just, really amazing at building relationships because they have to in order to bring in a paycheck every 2 weeks.
Yes, absolutely.
So, I know we've talked a lot about successes, and you've had amazing successes with clienteling and building your business. Um, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you and your team have faced with clienteling, and how have you overcome those challenges?
It's actually a conversation I had the other day. I asked somebody, "What's the hardest part of your job?" And they said, "Getting a client to come back. That they didn't have the right product, traffic is down, they don't have enough product, or they don't have enough newness." Um, and really, what I heard, I said, "Okay, that's fair, but why do you feel that way?" And ultimately, I mean, I think we can all agree. Ultimately, what they're really saying is that they don't know how to build a relationship to get somebody to answer their phone or answer their text message to come back. And it won't happen. It's not going to happen with every single person you meet, but it does need to happen, I think, organically with people that you just generally connect with. So I think that that's part of the biggest challenge, to get the mass group of employees to believe that relationships matter. That not just, your personal relationships outside of work, but that relationships can be fruitful when you invest in them. And I think that's just a life lesson, right? I've talked about it before. When you invest in a relationship, it's amazing what you get out of that. And to see the value past the purchase is, I think, most important, especially right now. So I think that that's probably it's the biggest challenge, I think, that we see across the board, is getting the buy-in of all sales teams and all leaders, right? I think, there's some leaders can say like, "Oh, we don't have time. Like, we don't have time. We just need to be on the floor. We have shipment, or we have reports or conference calls," but it's prioritizing relationships that will win every single time. So that's the biggest challenge I see, is that people don't believe relationships are easy to build, because I think they're focusing on the wrong way of trying to build a relationship.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of companies just focus on the numbers, but I think the truly
Yeah.
successful ones are the ones who focus on those relationships. And I
Yeah.
think that's the hardest thing to teach because it's really hard to teach somebody to care, right? You either do or you.
Yeah.
And I think when you really care about relationships, when you love people, when you have love for something that you do, and you love communicating with people, you love talking to them, you love helping them to really feel that same happiness and to leave with something that they're going to love and cherish for a long time. Um, you are going to get a better result. And I think customers too, they're savvy, they're smart, they can tell when you genuinely care and when you're pretending to care. So I couldn't agree
Absolutely.
more. I think the relationship aspect is probably the hardest thing in luxury retail. Um, but when you master that, when you figure out your own winning sauce or secret sauce for success, it's also the most rewarding.
Absolutely.
So, what advice can you share for companies or store management who are looking to build an effective clienteling strategy? And I know that's a complex question, but it's something that I think a lot of brands and a lot of store managers are really giving a lot of thought to now, now that traffic is so challenging in many markets.
Well, I think it's a complex question, but I think it's a simple answer. I think number one, you have to have the right leaders in place that believe in the focus of the client relationship. And, I think you also need to provide data as to why investing in relationships matters and why it will ultimately impact business. So I think that's number one, is finding the right people to drive these initiatives. And number two is obviously the right CRM system that makes sense for your business. I think there's amazing CRM systems, but if they don't relate to what you do and in that moment, it won't be utilized. And that's just natural. My top performers in my career, they're actually the harder people to buy into technology and systems because they have their own system and they will like, yeah, you, and then they just go do their own thing. So I think making sure that the CRM or the technology you're using makes sense. And the third aspect would be, and I've seen it in several brands that I've worked for and that my colleagues have also worked for. It's segmenting clients to have a different approach to everybody. I think oftentimes in luxury we focus on the top 1% of clients, and we just wine and dine them and we romance them, but you know, things can shift, and that's 1% of our business. And we really have to focus in especially in retail, on different segment groups and focus our leaders on different segment groups and driving. Maybe you have people that are just starting out with your brand. You need to have an action plan for people that are brand new to the brand, people that are fans of the brand. And I think what's being ignored now and starting to become a focus are that middle segment client, not your top spenders, but people that spend enough in your brand to know that, wow, this person can spend probably double, but we're not really focusing on them. So that's it. It's people, it's the right CRM system, and having a strategy for different client segments and really driving on that as the key message. And it's simplifying, I think, in stores, because ultimately we want people to stay busy. So, and it's, we saw this in COVID, and so everyone started jumping on Zoom calls, and that was just call after call after call. And then, when we got back to real life and stores, that remained. So I think it's really making sure that whatever's in the path of our teams that's keeping them from building relationships, including the leaders, we have to eliminate those things or prioritize them or readjust our schedules.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's all amazing advice. And I think there is a tendency to focus on that top grouping of clients, and not to say that we
Mhm.
shouldn't continue to focus on them, because I think we should, but I think our attention should really be on those mid-tier people, right? Because all of
Yeah,
those who are VICs today, at one point they were a walk-in client. There was someone who was brand new to the brand. So, I
yeah,
having a vision of who are our VICs of tomorrow, because those people could go away, and if we only focus on those top people, that's going to have a profound impact on our business if they walk away from us. Whereas if we really
absolutely.
focus on developing that next generation of VICs, I think that that's really going to help to maintain a healthy mix of our business. And I
Absolutely.
think also, like you mentioned, the system, having the right systems in place, having a system that was actually made this decade is important, right? Because
Yeah,
there's so many retailers that put something in place and they say, well, this is how we've done things for the past 15 years and it's worked just fine. But, a lot can change in that time. So making sure that you're constantly evaluating what you're doing is, I think, really important as well.
absolutely.
Well, great. Well, those are all the questions I have, and I would love to turn it over to our audience if they have any questions for Jill. You can go ahead and just drop it in the chat, and I can read off what questions we have coming in. Give it just a moment. Don't everyone speak at once.
I think everyone just agrees.
Yeah, well, there was so much great information that you shared, and such great advice. So I guess we were really clear.
Thank you,
Okay.
Jeff.
Of course. Yeah, my pleasure. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I think it was a really great conversation, and I really hope that everyone who's joined us today took something away from it. I know that I did, and I've really been looking forward to this for a long time. So I appreciate you coming on to speak to us today. We'd love to hear from all of you as well about future topics that you'd be interested in hearing about. So if, oh, I see one comment from Ron. Jill is awesome. We'd love to hear from you about future topics that you'd like for us to talk about. So feel free to send us a message on LinkedIn or shoot us an email if there's any particular topics that you'd like for us to touch on or discuss. And I hope that you can all join us for our next event on September 26th at 9 a.m., where we'll be talking about impactful morning meetings, also kind of tying back to that subject of motivation and training and just getting people excited for their day. So please join us if you're available. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a
Thank
great
you.